This is it. So I'm stepping in front of the camera to let you guys know a little bit more about the inspiration behind the film and how personal this documentary is to me. So I'll try to keep this brief, but not really. um, the inspiration behind the film, it came in November 2024. There have been little inklings of the film coming together, just the subject for the film and the topic for the film I never knew. So, very high level story. My mother, she was going through some health issues. She had always had very heavy periods, heavy bleeding, very painful periods. And some of those symptoms I experienced myself once I started my period when I was 11. I remember in middle school, in high school, having to like go home because I was nauseous. I was in so much pain. I was vomiting, just feeling really tired. But because my mom had experienced this, she also thought, well, this is just something Kiara has to go through. But this video isn't about me, it's about my mom. My mom thought, maybe this is normal because Kiara, I'm pretty sure my mom at that time probably thought this may be normal. She started her period. This is what my mom herself had experienced with her own period. So November 2024, my mother had been at her wit's end with her healthcare provider, specifically a gynecologist that she had been in the care. November 2024, my mother, at that time, she was at a very pivotal point in her own healthcare journey. She was having a lot of pain, heavy bleeding, and health issues that she was tired of. At this point, it had been over 16 years. She had been under the care of a gynecologist that told her, hey, you have abnormal pap smears, but it's really nothing to worry about. My mom had started seeing this gynecologist when she was 33. In her early 30s, my mother had me at 16, and through from that point on, she always had abnormal pap smears. So when she found this provider, she felt like, hey, I finally found someone that can listen to me, that would give me answers. In my mother's early stages of her healthcare journey and figuring out what was going on with her, she got married. So at that time, she also wanted to have other children, and that wasn't successful. She had been referred to fertility specialists, but then she hit a roadblock because the options for fertility are expensive, even with the proper healthcare insurance. The price that she was quoted to freeze her eggs until she could figure out what was going on was $60,000, and that was in the early 2000s. So fast forward, as I'm gaining more understanding of what my mom has been experiencing from now the lens of an adult, I'm now understanding like, hey, what you're experiencing isn't normal. Like, at this time, I had already had my own child. I had my daughter May 1st, 2024. And a year before I conceived, I actually went to my own gynecologist and I said, hey, I just want to check to see if I have fibroids. And the reason for that is because an aunt of mine on my dad's side, she had gotten a hysterectomy in her early 30s. And then another aunt in parallel, she was being consulted for a hysterectomy, also on my dad's side, because of heavy bleeding, just period pain, just the bloating, the fatigue, the anemia, all the symptoms we kind of brush off because we're women. And we're like, okay, well, this is a part of it. So getting back to my mom's story, I had always been telling her like my own journey and like how I try to advocate for myself. Long story short, the gynecologist I went to, I told her, I said, hey, I just want to do an ultrasound to see if I have any fibroids. She was a young white gynecologist. She was, I believe at that time, she was culturally sensitive. She listened to me, but I don't think she was well versed in all the research and the prevalence of fibroids in young African American women. And she told me, I don't think you need to worry about that. Maybe your body's just adjusting from coming off of birth control, because at that time I was experiencing heavy bleeding, pain, back pain, headaches, and also blood clots. I was having very large blood clots, but not the size of like a golf ball. That's typically your indicator. If it's larger than a quarter or a golf ball, you need to tell your provider. She turned me down, but I said to her, hey, I'm willing to pay for this imaging out of pocket. I knew, because I worked in the healthcare adjacent field in clinical research, in hospital settings and clinics, I knew that it would be no more than $200. I had $200 to spare when it came to my health. But I also know that that is a privilege. So being mindful of that, I said, well, for me to know, I know eventually I am getting married. I do want to have kids. I don't want this to be a barrier when I'm trying to conceive. So I go in for an ultrasound. They do actually find 3 small fibroids in my uterine wall. And at the time, they're like, oh, they're really small, nothing to worry about, but it could be contributing to some of your heavy bleeding. So I said, okay. And I asked all the questions. Could I get any tests around my fertility to know if I'm still fertile? And at the time, the gynecologist told me nothing to worry about. When you start trying, at least try for a year to determine if you aren't fertile or if you are fertile. So fast forward, now my mom's going through her journey. So I kind of know what questions to ask, what kind of questions to prepare her to ask. I had been advocating for my mom to change her provider for a few years, as she was like bringing me in, and I was connecting the dots to some of the memories I had of my mom on her period. Like when my mom was on her period, she would literally be bedridden. Like she would be in tears. I would rub her back, try to just put a heating pad on her back, just literally caring for her as if she is sick in bed, or if she has the flu or something, like, or a really bad stomach bug. So I knew every time my mom's period came every month, it would be very uncomfortable for her. So fast forward, we're in November 2024. At this time, I'm fasting and praying for a career shift. I'm fasting and praying as one of the leadership members on the women's ministry team at my church. We had been leading up and gearing up for a women's prayer night. At the start of that week, where we started to come together in agreement and meet and pray, that's when that Monday, my mom was going to see a new provider. She said, okay, I've had enough with it. She had another cervical biopsy. To give you guys context, she had been having cervical biopsies every 6 months to a year for over 16 years with no answers, without being referred out, anything like that. But these are the details of the story I wasn't privy to until after my mom's hysterectomy. So she went to see another surgeon. His specialty was surgery and fibroid removal and all the things. And he sat down with her, and in the first appointment, he said, your symptoms, I think your previous provider kind of downplayed your symptoms. Those were the words that he used that my mom is retelling to me. And he said, I think it may be a lot worse than what she may have told me. When my mom left the care of that provider, of course, they have to pass on the case and they have to give a quick debrief or a clinical history of the patient. So the surgeon said, hey, I'm going to refer you out for some ultrasounds, for some imaging. I'm also going to refer you out to do some labs and some hormonal testing. So the labs and the imaging came back abnormal. My mother is anemic, the things that she knew. But on the ultrasound, they found fibroids and ovarian cysts. At that time, 16 years under this doctor's care, my mother had never been told she had fibroids or ovarian cysts. In the process, as I'm like teasing out my mom's story and just hearing her account, she lets me know that she had been advocating for a higher dosage of just ibuprofen, other pain treatments other than pain relieving treatments other than birth control, because she wanted to conceive. She wanted to have another child, so that wasn't an answer for her. And that's honestly the only option the provider at that time gave her. Fast forward, it's November, the full first week of November. We're fasting and praying, me and the women's ministry leads, for the women in the women's ministry. And prior to that, I had taken like a staycation. And in my staycation, I was praying and asking God to give me revelation on what I would pray about, the scriptures to anchor me in my prayers and so on and so forth. And the word God gave me was obedience. I have more details about that in my Substack. I'll share the link below for you guys to read like the detailed story and timeline. But the word God gave me was obedience. So each night leading up until the prayer night would have been the Friday of that week. I don't remember the exact dates. My prayer topic was obedience. And I have been praying to God about different career options, opening up creative opportunities for me. This part is important. It all ties in. All of this was happening in parallel. So by the time my mother got to the end of that week, Friday, that day she called me, she said they're consulting me for a partial hysterectomy. And I was like, wait, what? How do we get here? A partial hysterectomy? Is that what are you sure you want to do that? Did you ask all the right questions? Do you know what care after a hysterectomy looks like? Like, are you sure that's a choice you want to make, or is that the choice they gave you? Are there other minimally invasive options? All the things I'm running through with my mom. And she said, yeah, that's the choice she wants to make. She doesn't want to have any children. So I am my mother's only child. She doesn't want to have any children, and she just wants to be free of the pain. So she was willing to go through with the partial hysterectomy. So the doctor locked in that he would bring her back for another consult to see when they could get her scheduled for her hysterectomy. That evening, after getting her news, and I'll put a clip in the video of my raw reaction of my mom's. No, I think it was after her surgery, so I'll put a clip in. But she had that. I'm sorry. After she relayed her news to me that evening, I went in for prayer night, and the topic for the prayer night, none of us knew. Our deaconess was leading the prayer night, and the topic was women's health. And I was just like, God, like, we're sitting here pleading and petitioning about fibroids, about heavy bleeding, about infertility, about all these things, but I feel like there's just a gap. Like, you do have to supplement healing with prayer and faith and belief, but there's also research and science that God has given us that needs to be backed by that. And there's a gap where that needs to meet. So God has just been pressing that on my heart. And I was like, well, you get these signs from God, you get these knowings and these inklings from the Holy Spirit, but it's just like, okay, what am I supposed to do with this? Where do I take the first step? I don't have a camera. I've never made a film. How do I do this? I'm not a writer. All the things we tell ourselves. So at this time, in parallel, I'm also praying about leaving my job. I had just become a new mother and returned to work for about 3 months, and I was just like, I'm not feeling this. There was an opportunity when my contract shifted over for me to get more into the creative aspect of the role that I was already doing. So I was the liaison between our research team and our education team. My job was to take evidence-based science and translate that into educational resources, whether that be Instagram reels, clinical guidelines, articles, publications, research posters, all the things you can think of. I was doing that behind the scenes. And I was like, hey, I'm getting really good at this. I want to take this another level. There have been talks about working on podcasts for this organization. There had also been talks on like growing our YouTube channel for this organization. And when the cards fell, it didn't fall through. So when it didn't fall through, I was like, God, I don't know what it is, but I can't shake this feeling like you want more for me. So in the process, a friend sent me an application for Creatives for Social Change in Medicine. I thought nothing of it. I looked at it, put it away. This is in November. Fast forward to December. My mom has a date for her surgery. Her surgery is scheduled for January 20th. And every December, our church goes into 31 days of prayer. And you can add on fasting if you want to. So within those 31 days of praying, I'm praying specifically for my mother's care team, that she has a successful surgery, all the things. In parallel, my stepdad was having health issues. So I just felt like, okay, I really need to lock in. Let me stop praying about this career stuff. Let me lock in on my family, on our health, on, coming against any spiritual warfare or any attacks from the enemy. So December, I had the deadline for the Creators for Social Change in Medicine, CSCM, led by Dr. Ade. Shout out to you, Dr. Ade. Led by Ade. The deadline for it was December 15th. December 16th, we had an in-person meeting. And I said to myself, let me see how this in-person meeting goes, because there have been a lot of leadership changes. And maybe from that meeting, I'll decide if I'll stay or not. I had already had conversation with my husband. Like, if I do leave my job, what does this look like for us financially? This is the vision that I feel like God is giving me. Will you allow me 3 months to run with this vision? And my husband was in agreement, fully supported me. So marry well, ladies, marry well. But I thank God for my husband to allow me that space and opportunity to fully lean in and be obedient to what God was calling me to. I felt. So when I applied for the CSCM, it was on the deadline. On December 15th, I applied. I went to the meeting the next day. And at the meeting, I found out that my boss would be out all of January. The plan that me and my husband talked about was to quit at the end of January, or, thug it out, just see how much longer I can finesse it, get another paycheck, keep going. So since we knew I was quitting, we just started stacking my paychecks to prepare for all the things that we had planned for 2025. And we were just trusting God, because we were also sowing a seed in our church. We were just trusting God to provide. So yeah. Fast forward, my mom has her surgery date. What else? I give a testimony about what I felt like God was telling me to do. At the time I gave my testimony, I didn't tell my church that I had made the decision to quit my job, because I knew my boss would be out all of January. So after the meeting, I had a great relationship with my boss. He couldn't understand why I was leaving, but I told him, I'm moving on. I don't have a plan. I'm staying home with my daughter. There's a little bit more to that. I did feel like after I had my daughter, things just shifted for me mentally with my marriage. And I was just like, I'm needed at home right now. My ministry right now is to lock in, be a mother, be a wife, and see what else the Holy Spirit, God, has for me. So I apply. The next week, I applied to the CSCM application cycle. We go to a couple's house from our church for dinner. Mariah and Drew, shout out to y'all, our divine destiny helpers, I would say. I had no idea this conversation would lead in this direction. Drew, Mariah's husband, says to me, he's like, Kiara, I really like what you're doing with the public health stuff. You should keep going, because the way you talk about public health, you put it in a different perspective. And I had already been having conversations with my husband, Kofi. I was like, babe, I really want to do more with Public Health Key. I started Public Health Key June 29th, 2024, when I was on maternity leave after having my daughter. And I was just like, I don't know what else I want to do with it, but I want to do something else. And Drew, long story short, he's like, I have a girl I went to college with. Me and her are real cool. She's in that space. Maybe you can network with her. And Drew was like, wait, before I connect you, let me just pray on it. So I said, okay, cool, no problem. I thought nothing of it. A week later, Drew sends me the girl's Instagram. I'm like, Drew, this is the woman that put out the call for the CSCM. Like, oh, you know her? Bet. I was like, okay, God, you answer prayers. Like, not only may I get into this cohort, but also you're going to allow me the opportunity to just learn from someone that is doing what I want to do, right? And one of the requirements of a cohort was to put out some form of use any medium using the foundation of narrative-based medicine to advocate for a social issue or a health issue of your choice. And at that time, I still didn't know what my topic would be, but I knew I wanted to do a documentary, because that is something that I danced around with at this time, like 3 years ago. And I posted about that on Public Health Key, about the woman that I reached out to 3 years ago, and now fast forward to now. But we can get to all that. So I finally get an acceptance to the CSCM, but this is before I meet a day. So she had already accepted me. I got in. The cohort is from January to April. This is important. I know it feels like I'm going on a tangent, but this is important. So the cohort starts. My mom is getting ready to have her surgery January 20th, inauguration day. So that day was very emotionally heavy, spiritually heavy for me. But I was just petitioning and pleading the blood of Jesus over my mom, over her care team, over the hospital, all the things. So fast forward, my mom, her surgery lasted a little bit longer than expected. So I'm praying. I'm like, oh, God, what's happening? What's going on? And she finally comes out of surgery. And the first thing my stepdad tells me is like, hey, they went in, they found a lot more than they were expecting, but your mom is okay. When she's in recovery and she's able to talk, I'll have her call you. My mom calls me. She was like, the surgeon said she had to be in so much pain because there was so much scar tissue that every time her ovaries were releasing eggs, the scar tissue was so thick and impacted, her eggs were not traveling through her fallopian tube to her uterus. And by the physical examination, now that the surgeon is in her uterus and looking at it, he could see the pain she was in. So imagine carrying that pain for 16 years. So I was livid. I was like, my mom was right. Like, how could you guys like not hear her? Like, she was complaining. Like, how many other women does this happen to? So my mind was going. And there was even a conversation we had with my stepdad where he apologized to my mom because he was like, I didn't know your pain was that bad. He said it didn't lock in, it didn't sink in until he heard the surgeon say it. So for me, it was just like, wow, my mommy was really suffering, but she was still going to work. She was still showing up because she had to. Um, so I made a quick, like, raw reaction to the news I had heard about my mother's surgery. So upon her surgery, they did find endometriosis. She was being consulted for a partial hysterectomy, but it ended up being a full hysterectomy because the ovarian cyst and the fibroids had just literally taken over my mom's uterus. It wasn't viable if he were to save it, and there would be a chance she would have to come back for another surgery. And since she, had told the provider she wasn't looking to have other children, he went forward and did the full hysterectomy. So I'll insert a quick clip of my raw reaction. Today's date is January 20th, 2025. I am just processing having a conversation with my mom after her hysterectomy. She received a full hysterectomy. The surgeon that went in said when he went in, there was so much scar tissue, so much damage between the ovarian cysts, the fibroids, and from what he is assuming right now, endometriosis. When she would ovulate monthly, the egg, I believe, would travel through the fallopian tube, but wasn't being, I don't know if it was getting stuck, wasn't being put in the right places. Not sure right now. These are just raw, authentic thoughts. Her provider that she had been going to for years prior to this provider, not once did that provider raise questions or refer her out to a specialist. This provider just suggested biopsies every 6 months. And with those biopsies, they always came back abnormal and inconclusive. So my mom had been struggling with very severe bleeding and pain every month around her period. I'm still processing. I'm livid. And this timing, I'm also in the process of putting together a documentary about women's chronic health issues and how some of the outcomes are hysterectomies because it goes for so long without proper screening, without proper prevention, conversations, and things like that. I didn't know that my documentary would be centered around my mother's health journey. But I'm just processing it all. I just hope that this documentary can be a great way to raise awareness, to help other women like my mom, myself, ask the right questions, and just change the trajectory of the conversations around our reproductive health and how we advocate for ourselves and what the standardized screening look like for Black women. And then my gears started going. And at this time I was asking God, what will you have me do the documentary about? If you gave me this opportunity to be a part of CSCM in this timing, when I quit my job, now I have the time on my hands, what will you allow me to make a documentary about? And women's health kept coming up, but I was just like, no, that's not for me. Because every conversation around women's health, I either saw them talk about menopause or fertility in reproduction. And I was just like, there is so much more to a woman's health than her ability to reproduce. I'm still fully understanding what happens during each phase of my period. I'm still fully understanding what are some of the chronic gynecological issues that we face as women and how to ask questions. What are the symptoms? How do we advocate for that? And I had already been having conversations with other friends that needed to find new providers. So I'm helping them find new providers, asking questions. Because I had just a knack for asking questions and a clinical research background, a research background, public health background, I just started looking through the literature. I started reading books, and I was just like, okay, God, I'm going to do my documentary on my mom's story. Let me get my mom's permission. Let's see if she's open to it. She was open to it, so we did it. I asked all the questions. In February, I knew we were going down to visit her during her recovery time. So I was like, okay, she'll be a month post-op, and I could, ask her questions. And I asked her for sure if she was okay with recording at that time, and she said yes. So asked her questions, all the things, got it on film, and I was like, okay, I am going to do a documentary on my mom. But then something said, no, this could be more. So I put a call out, and I was just like, let's see if I can get other personal stories and other subject matter experts. Like, I can read the literature, but the language and the texture and the layers that others can add to this, I think would drive home the call to action. There needs to be better pre-screening. There needs to be better healthcare access and coverage for things like ultrasounds for fibroids and all the things. But also there needs to be more research. In a time such as this, then we think about the story of Esther, where health communications is being cut, research funding is being pulled. Now is the time to stand in the gap. And I immediately said to myself, with what resources? So I talked to my husband, I'm praying, and he's like, babe, just ask the people in our circle. You never know. And I have to shout out Andrew. Andrew had the equipment. I was nervous to ask him, but Andrew said, Key, I got you. He was like, I trust you. And I was like, what? I was like, okay, this project may take a few months to film. Are you sure? And he was like, yeah. And I was like, oh, okay. I had the idea, I had the vision, I had the plan. I just needed to roll with it. I just needed the funding. I didn't have any funding. The Holy Spirit was funding this plan. So shout out to Drew. Shout out to my sister circle that prays for me and like really cheered me on. Lindsay, Ray, Alma, Julia, y'all know who y'all are. But also shout out to my mother for trusting me with her story, for trusting me to advocate for her. And I don't think that this film is just about telling my mom's story anymore. I feel like it's a greater purpose that God is orchestrating. He's using me as a vessel, but he's orchestrating to advocate for a multitude of women, but the next generation of women. So I'm just using the things that I'm passionate about, the gifts that God has given me and my calling to do those things. And I'm just grateful that God trusts me with that. So I don't want to drop what God has given me in my hands. I want to use what God has given me and placed in my hands, and I want to steward this blessing well. So that is the inspiration behind the film. Please continue to follow for more. I will put out more videos about my process, pre, post production, and in production, and some bloopers as I go about this process. And there's more to come. So thank you guys for tuning into this journey. I really appreciate you all.